In every movement, there have been activists who have fought tirelessly for racial justice.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
In this series, we dive into the lives of activists who stood on the front lines of two pivotal eras of the Black liberation movement, the Civil Rights Movement.
The church is always supposed to be the safe sanctuary if you're sitting in there. But we were amazed while we were in there.
And the uprisings following the tragic death of Mike Brown.
We've seen officers respond in such a heavy way that dogs out, tanks, tear gas, M16s, like this was Iraq.
For these activists, what was there to gain? Or, better yet, what was there to lose in their fight for freedom? On this episode, from protest to politics and the Ferguson movement. Welcome to I Bear Witness, Freedom Fighters on the Front Line. I'm your host, Tiffany Lee, and today we have with us Maria Chappelle-Nadal. Maria Chappelle-Nadal is a dedicated public servant, community advocate, and champion of social justice. Maria served 8 years in the Missouri House of Representatives, 8 years in the Missouri Senate, State Senate, and 5 years as a Board of Education member in University City. She is a multi-dimensional legislator whose record is marked by her bold stances on issues like health care, criminal justice reform, and economic empowerment. Maria is also a leading voice in the fight for environmental justice and conservation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. All right, you went into politics at a very young age. What sparked your interest in politics?
I always loved politics, and it was in my nature when I was in high school. The only thing I knew I wanted to do is to help educate people who look like me on policy issues, and that ended up being politics and government. But I knew that I just loved government. I would watch every single presidential debate since I was a kid.
Presidential debates as a kid?
Yeah.
Oh, no. No. Yeah, that is.
I did.
Wow. What were you fascinated by?
Well, I first voted for Carter when I was 5 at my elementary school.
Oh, wow.
Jimmy Carter. And, you hear things. I think it's the environment in which I was in. My mom was an activist. My father was an activist. They were people who believed in changing the system inside and out. And I think that was just part of the makeup of who I was and who I am.
Okay, wow. And so you started attempting to change the system at a very young age. I know you were elected at the age of 28.
29.
29,
29,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for the correction. So what was that like as a 29-year-old?
Well, Barbara Jordan from Texas, she was first elected to the House of Representatives in Texas at 29 years old. And I knew that there were so many women who looked like me, who had run for office. DeVern Lee Calloway, the first African-American woman in the city of St. Louis, in the state of Missouri, to serve in the Missouri House of Representatives, was a friend of my mother's.
Oh, really?
In my precinct, the first woman who served as a statewide office holder, Harriet Woods, she was a neighbor. And then
so you had a lot of powerful people in your house and around.
Around my house,
right.
In my house. And DeVern's husband, Ernest Calloway, was a professor at St. Louis University and taught my mother. He was also very active in labor rights, and also just in the movement from a very intellectual level. And so that, you know, I remember being a little girl and going to their house and reading the Bible to him when he was, after he had a stroke. And so my mom and I would do that on Saturdays. And his wife, DeVerne, she would always be filing papers. And she was a state representative at the time, and I didn't recognize that she was a state representative, but she wanted to catalog like all of the things that she had and all of the newspaper articles and all of her bills, and I would pretend to help her file, you know, when my mom was with Ernest.
So at 29, you go in, you have all of these influences to push you forward. What did you want to accomplish?
Every day I woke up and asked myself, how are you going to prove that you're worthy of the people that elected you into the office? And so some of the big issues that came before me are public education and making sure that we did not have a voucher program in the state of Missouri. We also had immigration issues. So as we look at what's happening in the news today, I'm thinking about all of my activism when I was in the House of Representatives years ago.
What were some of the things that you did accomplish in the House of Representatives?
Oh, I was always an organizer, and I was always someone who can put a really difficult concept into simple terms for other people. I am someone who naturally likes to debate. And so when I was in high school, I would often debate. I was on the debate team, mock trial team.
Oh, wow, really?
And so I would always take my position, but I would educate myself. Like I would find the experts on an issue, and I would take time to learn from them so I could be better prepared in the legislature. And that's what I did. That's what I continue to do in the Senate. My first filibuster, I think it was 6 weekends where I studied with trial attorneys, and I filibustered for 10 hours and 45 minutes. They couldn't believe a big woman did that.
Because you can't leave the floor.
You can't leave the floor. You can't go to the bathroom. You have to stand the entire time.
And what did you get accomplished through that filibuster?
We didn't have bad immigration policy. I think, well, that was another filibuster. The 10-hour and 45-minute one had to do with work discrimination. And so that measure did not pass. I was able to kill that bill. They were trying to go all the way back to 1964 policies, which, you know, are not amenable to the society that we represent today. And you know, I went through cases, case by case, and the one that stands out is a young person who was working at a grocery store in Kansas City who was harassed by their employer, and they were 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
And just imagine there would be legislation barring that individual from suing their employer for harassment. So I talked about that. I just remember that case because it's the one that really took my heart.
Yeah. So you kind of came in as a little firecracker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you served as a Missouri state representative, and then you went on to the Senate. What's the difference in those positions?
A lot of power. Every senator is an island. So there are 34 senators in the state of Missouri, and you don't have a caucus chair telling you or dictating what you're going to do, like in the House. In the Senate is your office is your domain. Your policies are policies of your district. You're only there for your district. You're there for your district, then you're there for your party, then you're there for the state. And that's how it works. And I remember my mom always said, she said, there may come a time where you question, you know, are you maintaining your integrity? Are you doing what's right for the people? I was lucky because I never had to compromise my values, not once. And I was really, really lucky for that. But I worked. It was so simple just to represent the people. But being
You say
educated.
it's simple, right? And you say you never had to compromise. Was that just an active choice, though?
Not compromising my values. I never had to do that.
Right, I'm saying that, I mean, but it seems like it's always a situation where you have the choice, right? But choosing not to was something that was always just at the forefront of your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, you could have chosen, anyone could have chosen, you know, to take a different path forward, serving in the legislature. But because of the district that I represented, which was very diverse, you know, people cared about specific issues. As long as I stood on those issues and also did my constituency work, it was simple. If people cared about disability, I stood up for that. There were people who cared about immigration policy. I stood up for that. People cared about public education. I could, you know, even tell you a story of a woman who was, she's deceased now, but she was pro-life, but she's very pro-public education. And when I was knocking on her door, she said, "I don't like the fact that you're pro-choice." And I said, "Well, Elsie, I am pro-public education just like you are." And from that point on, she always supported me. And there are a lot of people who were like that.
Just finding that common ground.
Common ground. Joe Cavato is another one. He was for charter schools, and at the time I was not, and I wrote him a 4-page letter. And he was like, "You know what? We disagree, but you wrote me a 4-page letter telling me why you're against charter schools." So that's the kind of effort that I put into my work.
That's good. So were you a state senator when the protests began in Ferguson?
Yes. I remember the day. And I think I was telling you that I was washing my hair. It was in conditioning, and I was walking around the park for my exercise. And I was getting multiple calls from Antonio French. "You got to get up here. You got to get up here." And I didn't see anything on Twitter. I hadn't seen anything on social media. So I go up there, and Michael Brown Jr.'s body was gone by that time, but people were still there, and people were very numb and very angry at what they had seen for hours in the heat. And I mean, I took pictures every day, and some of the pictures, some of the people who were in those pictures, I became very close to.
Really?
Yes, very close.
So at that time, you said when it first started, it was just kind of like a community coming together.
Oh, the first few days, it wasn't protesting. It was a gathering of people who were numb, and they were shocked. You know, they were like, "How could this happen? How could, you know, first of all, you know, someone who is fleeing away with their back towards a police officer be shot by that police officer, be laying on the ground for so many hours." People were numb, and they were in disbelief. Protesting didn't start, I want to say protesting started after the first day of tear gassing, which was on the 11th. After the tear gassing started, you know, the protest started.
Were you out there when they began tear gassing?
Yes. I was stuck on a street that had no way out. There was only one way in, and the same way in was the same way out. And I remember a woman who was 6 months pregnant who was thrown to the ground by police officers, face down. I remember the story of a woman who was shot in the eye. She lost her eye. There were helicopters that were above us. There was 20-year-old gas canisters, tear gas canisters. And I lost my voice. I started, and I still have it. I have, because of that event on August 11th, that evening, I have a specific amount in which I can talk, and I can't strain my voice. So like when I get sick now, I actually lose my voice because of the 20-year-old tear gas canister. So that next day, that next morning, I was in the shower crying, and I had a meeting with another senator. And I couldn't, who knows tear gassing pretty well, right? Who is threatened by police that, I supported them at the time, and I'm getting tear gassed by, officers that I had seen on ride-alongs, Officer Lane was one of those people because I was researching gangs in St. Louis. And he was one of the officers who was on the front line, and he was on one side, I was on the other, and it's like I have to be with my community.
Oh, that's interesting because I was thinking about that when we kind of did a pre-interview, and you said your father worked for the marshals, or? My
father was the first or second marshal in the city of St. Louis. And my grandfather, his father, was very active in politics in City Hall years ago and had his own business. But as I said, my father, and he was appointed by, it starts with a C, a mayor that starts, his last name starts with a C, and I'm forgetting it right now, but.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about, I guess, the juxtaposition of that, because if you come from a family that has a police background, right, you see the police in a certain way because you see it right now. At that time, I supported the police. So then to be confronted with what you were confronted with,
it was a difficult situation, and I was traumatized. When I went north on Hanley from home to go to Ferguson to protest every day, you'd have a county brownie just right there on Hanley, and it frightened me. Like my hands would start shaking. I no longer felt comfortable. I felt like I was a target, just like everyone I represented.
Wow. So now all of this happened early, so the question becomes, you just said, when I would go back there every day, why go back?
I had to be among the people. Going back to my daily philosophy, how are you going to prove you're worthy, Maria, is being among the people. And I found myself in the gap, literally, on that Sunday after Mike Brown was killed. We were at the police station, and on one side, on the blacktop, you had a row of police officers, and on the streets, you had people, again, not protesting yet. We were just like surrounding each other. I mean, there were, rival gang members who put down their differences, set them aside, and, they were together. We had underground rappers who were out on the streets. There was a little girl in a pink T-shirt that said, "God loves you." I mean, I remember all of these things.
Wow. Yeah. So it seems like you said, it started off and it was kind of just like community, and then kind of a violent reaction by the police that led to protests and everything like that. But then there were some ebbs and flows, so it would kind of dissipate for a while, but then November 24th.
Yeah, on November 24th, I get a call from a relative of mine who asks me, "Where are you?" And I responded to him, and he said, "Okay, I just want you to know I heard from the streets that someone is looking for you, like in a dangerous way." And before that happened, he prepared me with a rifle, showed me how to use it. Because they were concerned, my family was concerned about my safety, and they wanted me to be prepared.
And this was all because you were standing up for your constituency by protesting in the streets.
Yeah, because of my activism.
So as a state senator and also as a protester, what role did you play?
Well, I was the intermediary in many ways. I was the translator, because there were a lot of people who I served who had not communicated with their city councilman or their mayor. And on the other side of the table, I was also a legislator who is accustomed to policies and procedures and a certain kind of decorum. And so people who were in the legislature with me, they didn't understand the cultural difference of the people I actually represented. You know, they didn't understand the number of grown men crying who experienced racism. You know, one in particular it was the first time I held a grown man cry in my whole life. And like, you know, just being at that intersection of, you know, one, taking the step to help educate the public, the electorate, people who were in the protest every day, you know, how do you present an argument before your city council or your county council? And then at the same time, when I was in the legislature, you know, I would have to explain to my colleagues, hey, there's some differences. So like, they may not know that they set up a meeting with you first. You know, so you know, you have
don't
to.
Say if they come into your office expecting to speak. Okay.
Yes. So like, you know, they may be demanding time with you, not knowing that they're supposed to set up a meeting. So if you don't mind having some patience, you know, and being like, yeah, we could sit down and have a conversation and tell us what happened when you were in Ferguson, et cetera, you know. And that's where I was. I was a mother, a sister, a teacher, and a translator simultaneously.
Oh wow! And it seems like you're playing a great role here, right? So you're representing your constituency. You're also working as a translator, but then you get threats against your life, and then. Was there also backlash amongst your colleagues?
Yeah. So there were less than a handful of us who were elected, who were actually on the streets. So you had Representative Sharon Pace, who was not so much out in the streets, but she was providing for the family of Michael Brown, his grandmother, his mother, just making sure they have some basic necessities. And then there was Courtney Curtis, who was also on the ground, trying to help with some of the institutional things. And then I was out every single day. But there were a lot of other electeds who weren't there. And you know, I feel as though some people were comfortable being removed from the streets. And I kind of felt alone, you know, because there were literally only like 3 of us who were doing things on the streets every day. And there were people who were Democrats who never showed up, both white and black. And it just concerned me.
Yeah. But were you ever singled out because of your activism?
Oh, yeah. I think I was blackballed because of my activism.
How so?
I said things like I was on Andrea Mitchell and I called Governor Nixon a coward because he never showed up to Ferguson. You know, he had a press conference at UMSL with some elected officials, but he never was on the streets to like hear the voices of people who were crying out, you know, who were numb. They may not have come from the same background. I know many of them didn't, 99% of them didn't, but they deserve to be heard and held by their governor.
Right. Exactly. You talk about some of the traumas that you have had from these experiences, and also medical problems from the tear gas and everything. So are there a lot of people suffering from mental and physical ailments from being out there on the front lines?
I think the trauma continues, especially for like Chocolate. She was hogtied. You know, there were other people I see her face right now, but other people who were mistreated by police in St. Anne. And like they dealt with that trauma, you know, and some of them had outlets though, like the complexity of St. Louis is that we have a certain segment that likes to band-aid the situation. So there were chosen people who were not so offensive, who were taken in by the political elite to help redirect them, you know. But there was nothing for someone like myself, an outlet, you know, from my government or the political elite to deal with the trauma that I experienced on the streets. You know, I never thought that I would fear a police officer like I did, but because of what I saw, because of the stories I heard, it was frightening. So I still hold on to that trauma and those memories. I couldn't sleep. I was afraid to go to sleep at night. I would only go to sleep when there was light outside, so about 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
I would go to sleep, and I had nightmares. And there are a lot of other people who went through the same things.
Yeah, that's really sad because, you know, as Black people, we already have an issue a lot of times with seeking the mental help that we need, and then to have these traumas kind of compounded on top of that, then you can see why, you know, activists have it even harder than most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to November 24th though, because that happened to you, but it was also a pivotal point in the protest as well.
Oh yeah, so November 24th was when the jury decided not to indict Darren Woods, the police officer that killed Mike Brown Jr. And so there was a lot of violence in the streets that night. There was a person who was actually killed that night.
Oh really?
Yes,
wow,
there was. He was a twin. And I later on in other work I did investigated that to try to figure out who murdered that person. The office where I was teaching civic engagement to the activists, that whole building was burned down. So it was mayhem in the streets in a real way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys sacrificed a lot. I mean, you're basically saying that you were kind of being blackballed, kind of ushered, pushed out, right? Some people may have sacrificed their mental health. Some people have possibly sacrificed their careers as well. So for those sacrifices, what were some of the accomplishments that came out of all of your hard work? Senate
Bill 5, that is something that deals with municipalities targeting people for profit and revenue for those municipalities. And it was a big deal, you know, being stopped just for a light out or being stopped because you don't have your seatbelts on. And then, you know, there would be a succession of events that happen just for profit. So I think it's the Max Creek law that we revamped in Senate Bill 5. And I think it's awareness just generally. And the complexity of the situation, no one had seen that. I mean, you have to understand this is a global event. You had people in China who were raising their hands, you know. You had people from Palestine teaching people on the ground in St. Louis how to protect themselves when you're tear gassed, having milk, I had a gas mask. I had a person, I had to put it down as a campaign contribution, but someone bought me a gas mask.
Oh wow!
I keep it up on my wall.
Wow!
Who would ever think that someone would have to buy you a gas mask? Who would ever think that, you know, you're carrying a rifle around? So
Yeah, I think also, I guess, when we talk about this, something else came to mind too. The hiring of more black police officers in Ferguson. I think that was a change, and then the election of the.
Yeah, that's right. So I think there was only one African American, Dwayne, who was on the city council, and then there were others who ran. Ella, she was a council person, I think became the mayor. And then there was Mr. Bell, who was on the council as well.
Yeah. So there was some changes that were made. Incremental.
Right. What's really necessary, though, is that we don't whitewash the situation. Because, as I said, there are a lot of institutionalists who want to Band-Aid what happened 11 years ago, and want to just say, oh, it's gone, we don't have any problems anymore. But we have to remember that I call them faux, like F-A-U-X,
right.
Faux progressives, who started speaking in our tongue.
On your behalf? You mean?
In our tongue.
Using your language.
In our tongue.
Okay.
As people of color who didn't understand that they were exercising erasure. And they're doing it today. You have faux progressives who are elected now speaking in our tongue who do not realize the infringement that they are participating in when they erase the voice of black people.
So, without naming names, can you give the audience an example of what you mean by that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Ferguson report. So the Ferguson report, while good, a lot of people put a lot of effort into the Ferguson report, but it was also political.
Okay.
It was quite political because at the time, before Ferguson even happened, the uprising ever happened, we were dealing with two unaccredited school districts, Normandy and Riverview. And the district that I represented had Normandy and a little piece of Riverview. Oh, wow. And so I had worked my bottom to the bone. And my legislation is always mathematical. Like you have to put pieces together of a puzzle to figure it out. And usually I ended up being the only person of color and woman in a room filled with white men explaining what legislation does, because I'm good at that. I got that legislation all the way through a Republican Senate, all the way through a Republican House, 2 years in a row, and Governor Nixon vetoed the measure that was going to help our school districts, and because they were financially hemorrhaging because of all the money that was going out. So I had to develop a mechanism to give children who were in specifically unaccredited school districts an opportunity to go to fully accredited buildings in other districts, and just stop that financial hemorrhaging. Well, the problem is in the Ferguson report, it became political because he inserted the unaccredited school districts, that whole conversation in there, and say, oh, we can't have students who transfer out to other schools. We have to keep them on the plantation, And that's basically what was in the Ferguson report. And so then you had people who don't look like me without my hue who were like, yeah, we shouldn't have transfers.
Wow.
So that's an example. And then the names are in my head, the faces are in my head, but they would just swear by that Ferguson report as if 100% of it was right. And although most of it was on point,
right,
a good amount of it was political.
Right.
And it was utilized for the governor to get his way.
Oh, wow. So you had some positives. May not have gotten where you wanted to be. All right. What would you say needs to be done to keep us moving forward rather than going backwards?
At this point in my life, what I'm looking at is county government, city government, they both have the same problems. I live in the county, so I focus on county problems. But I think the electorate, people who are experiencing isms, really should be more engaged in government. I mean, we're going back to me like teaching civic engagement. We need more civic engagement because some of the decisions that are being made at the county level, again, I can't speak on the city because I don't track the city, but in the county, like, questions need to be asked. There needs to be more depth, more research, and it's shocking to me that there are certain measures that are passed in St. Louis County without input from the people who are experiencing isms.
Oh, wow.
You know, it's just, you know, once upon a time I complained about the state. The state is doing fantastic in comparison to St. Louis County. The only difference is it's a bunch of Democrats who are fighting over fiefdoms.
So you've held several offices, and you recently ran for office again. Is that your plan? What is your plan for the future as this person who was, you know, this young firecracker in the realm of politics, and then also freedom fighters on the front line of Ferguson? Hey, what is the next step for Maria Chappelle-Nadal?
I'm still a firecracker.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm just choosing to focus on St. Louis County government. And because I didn't realize that there was such a deficit, you know, and the way that things are run. You know, county government is supposed to be about servicing the people who are most vulnerable. It's not about being a Democrat. It's not about being a Republican. It's not about being in a unincorporated area versus a municipality. It's about servicing people. That's it.
Okay.
It's not about power. It's about servicing people in need. That's as simple as it can be. You know, but when politics is injected in servicing people, just basic things. Like, it shouldn't be a problem for people to be able to pay their property taxes. There should not be a backlog. It shouldn't be a problem for people who are trying to get their senior tax write-off. That shouldn't be a problem. It's just something that you execute and it's done. In St. Louis County, it's a whole drama. It's a whole fiasco.
So it sounds like they need you to go in there and clean it up. Maybe.
Well, I told you I'm still a feisty sister.
Okay. Okay. So what would you say to any young people who are out here considering going into politics, like the young woman that you were going into politics? What would you say to them?
Ask questions, be prepared, and be willing to learn from the best. You know, it wasn't by accident that I had a DeVern Lee Calloway in my life. It wasn't an accident that the first female statewide office holder was a neighbor of mine. You know, it wasn't by accident that you have this scholar from St. Louis University who was my mom's professor, who I read the Bible to on Saturday mornings. You know, be open, be prepared, and be willing to learn, because I still learn. I don't know everything. You know, no one knows everything. Life is about learning and evolving. And I think as long as people keep that in mind, that your position in a certain issue may be one thing this year, and next year it may be something else.
As you continue to learn.
Check.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.